I fell in love with animation when I was a kid in middle school. I was reading books about motion pictures, and suddenly I found a chapter on animation. And so the medium excited me. I loved making movies. I loved telling stories. I loved drawing pictures. And so I set my heart on working for Disney when I was still a kid in junior high school and began making my own films while still a student, and eventually went to art school and then finally ended up here at what was then known as Walt Disney Productions. When I arrived at Disney in the 1950s, a lot of the Disney masters were still here, still working. The nine old men were still at the drawing boards, still creating great animation. Guys like Milt Kahl, Frank Thomas, Ollie Johnson, who were masters of animation. Ivan Earle, the guy who created the color style, the brilliant color styling for Sleeping Beauty, was still here. I had the opportunity to go up to Ivan's office and actually watch him paint. Talk about, what a thrill that was. There were many, many talented artists working at Disney. And of course, Walt was here, the leader. And never thought I'd have the opportunity to work with Walt Disney, but that came about in 1966 with The Jungle Book. So it was just an incredible time for a young artist to be able to work with the best of the best, some of the finest animation artists in the world. And they were all here in Burbank at the Walt Disney Studio. And if you were lucky enough to make the cut and to work with these guys, you were a very lucky young artist indeed. Sleeping Beauty was in production when I was still a kid in school, believe it or not. And I ended up at Disney working on the motion picture. We're talking about the days when animated films were made by hand, literally by hand, frame by frame. And so the animator's rough drawings have to be cleaned up. Now, there were thousands of drawings. I was on a cleanup crew, and I worked on the three good fairies, Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather. And I was on those sequences probably for 2.5 years doing those three characters. Well, Disney had a basic house style, and that was part of working at Disney. You couldn't experiment too much. A little bit, because Walt did allow it, especially in the 50s when we began to try other things. But there was always that Disney house style that Walt would want to pull us back to. But Walt was kind of a conservative guy when it came to his design style. So he always liked what we knew as that basic Disney style. So back in 1966, I found myself upstairs in 2C, part of the story crew on The Jungle Book, something that was totally unexpected. It was a great promotion, of course, because I had the opportunity to work with Walt Disney. Not many people were granted that opportunity. But here I was, still a young kid, still green in many ways, working with one of the greatest storytellers ever. Developing an animated film is very much a collaborative effort because, keep in mind, hundreds of people often work on these films. Now, it was kind of interesting back in 1966 because we had a very small crew, probably no more than a dozen animators on the film and maybe a half dozen background artists. So we were working very lean and mean back in the early 60s, mainly because of economics and mainly because we had to get a job done and get it done quickly. So in many ways it was very exciting because we had limited time and we had a film to finish. So we had to work fast, we had to think fast, and luckily we had a boss who could make decisions quickly. And those decisions were made by Walt Disney. Besides the gorgeous artwork, I love seeing the old photographs of the Disney studio. I love seeing the artists at work. Somehow it connects me with Disney's past and makes me wish, in many ways, I had been a part of those early days. It's just great to take a journey back into the past. And those of us who love Disney and who love animation can't get enough of this stuff, not just the artwork, but just all of the little items and the little odds and ends that take us back to a Disney that once was and has since moved on. So it's a great way to visit the past. It's a great way to look at original art and to see how far we've come. The Walt Disney Studio was a very special place. I consider myself getting here late because I didn't arrive here until the 1950s. So in a way, I feel like I missed the 30s and I missed the 40s, and I missed a lot of good films. But I'm grateful that a lot of this has been preserved, archived, and can be shared with young artists today and fans of Disney today. It's all here, and this is a gorgeous book.